and start. Okay, Tom, in a minute we'll be ready to go, and I will... Okay, Tom, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Good day, everyone. This is another Meet the Gurus. As I think many of you know, we're dedicated to technology, business, entertainment, entrepreneurship, and the fields that convert and how these fields converge. Thanks for tuning in again. I'm Paul Siegel. Today we have the wonderful experience of working with Tom Murrell, who is based in Perth, Australia. Tom, thanks for joining us today.
Good day from down under.
Thank you. Good to see you again. So, Tom, tell us a little about yourself before we jump into this program. It's all going to be about presentations. It's all going to be how to communicate clearly, how to get a message across. But tell me a little bit, how did you get into the field of making presentations and teaching about it?
Well, I did an honours degree in biochemistry. I spent a whole year purifying an enzyme. That taught me that I enjoyed people more than test tubes. So I'm a qualified biochemist but never practiced in that area. Then I studied agriculture and economics. So I'm a qualified economist but never practiced in that area. And then I got into the media, and I was with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation for 12 years as a reporter, presenter, executive producer and senior executive. And also I spent time as a TV weather presenter. And then I've been running my own business for 23 years as an international business speaker. So I've been working behind a microphone for 35 plus years, and I've written the book on international speaking called Insider Secrets of International Speaking, which is considered the Bible of international speaking. So that's my background. I've been doing presentations for a long time. I've seen lots of presentations, I've done lots of presentations, and I've coached many people in how to be a more effective presenter.
So what makes a good presentation? I mean, if you could summarize it at a very top level, what makes for a good presentation? Is it the tools and techniques? Is it the way someone dresses? Is it how they carry themselves? How would you summarize it, if you could?
The first most important point is intent. What do you want to achieve with the presentation? Is it to inform, inspire, or motivate? So really be clear on what your goals and intent is. And there are many different forms of presentations. Work out which one you are best suited to and which is your focus. And then secondly, simplicity beats complexity every time. So it really is about simple messaging, takeaway messaging that sticks, what we call the stickiness of the message.
Yep.
So that's about coming up with really good phrases, using techniques like alliteration, rhyming. Key messaging is all important. And then the presentation must be engaging. So you must have both head and heart aspects of your presentation. So you engage the minds in a logical way with facts, but you also engage the audience at an emotional level with their hearts.
Interesting. So you talked about intent as the most important, well, the first and this, I guess, central issue when you make a presentation. Often people wander, often people don't know really what they're supposed to do other than read a speech, other than stand in front of their boss and say something. How do you really come up with what the ultimate intent is, right? We all know that we do things during the day, but what is the real intent? How do you distill the intent of a presentation?
Well, what you need to do is be laser-like with your focus. So set some specific goals. So if you're doing a sales presentation and there's 100 people, work out what your sales conversion rate is. Do you want 50% of those people in the audience to buy your product? Or is it a motivational style presentation where people might need some motivating because they're facing a lot of challenges? So how can you motivate them to perform better? Or is it purely skills transfer? That might be a training program where the presenter has many years experience and you want to transfer some of those skills to the delegates. So all of those different types of presentations require a different intent and often a different structure and a different approach. What I see is confident people that might be confident trainers get asked to do a keynote presentation, and they go into training modality, whereas a keynote is all about one big idea to shift thinking, and it's more theatre, and it's more messaging, and it's more engagement. Whereas training, you need to allow space and time for the delegates to take in the new material and then practice it in terms of adult learning principles, and then get feedback and coaching on their performance. So they are very different skill sets and very different intents, a keynote versus running a training program.
Are there ways of pivoting? So let's say you want to provide that theater, you want to provide that big inspirational message a la Steve Jobs, at the same time pivot that into a more tactical training discussion. So you're trying to make a really big pitch idea to your boss. At the same time, you want to now get down into the details. You want to make a big pitch presentation about your business plan or your big idea, but at the same time, you want to show people how that big idea works. Are there techniques that you use in presentation that make that big presentation splash or provide that clear intent, but then pivot the intent, or is that just a confusing way of doing presentations?
It can be confusing, but one of the most powerful words you can use in all types of presentations, so this concept is both universal and endearing across all presentation types, is to use the word because. So you make your pitch or your idea and you want to get buy-in from the audience, and then you use the word because. So that links the big concept with a reason for people to believe, or a reason for people to take up the new idea and act on it. And then the other concept is to give concrete examples or concrete case studies, because what you're doing is taking something intangible, like a big idea, but you want to make it concrete and tangible by using a really good case study. And then often metaphors are really powerful as well, because again, you're taking a sort of complex idea and you can turn it into something simple, but a metaphor then makes it very compelling in terms of understandability and stickability. And so you need to use a metaphor that's kind of across cultures and demographics, and perhaps even matches with the theme of your presentation, or matches with the unique background of you as a person and your personal brand. And as you know, my own background is as an elite level athlete, elite level hammer thrower, Australian champion. So I use metaphors in my presentations that I take from hammer throwing to illustrate a point. For example, if I'm talking about marketing, I'll say, well, you can have the longest throw in the hammer competition, but still not win the gold medal. Why would that be? Well, it's a field event, and they mark out a sector on the field. And if your hammer throw lands 1 millimetre outside of that sector, it's a foul throw. And marketing can be a lot like that as well. You can waste a lot of time and effort, and your marketing efforts are wasted because they don't land within the sector. And that's the whole concept of sector marketing, or market segmentation, or target marketing. So I use the metaphor of hammer throwing to illustrate the power of target marketing, because it suits my personal brand and my background, and most people grasp the concept of field events in track and field because of the prominence and the visibility of the Olympic Games.
You've in one of your training programs with us, you've used the example of bringing in your personal experiences, as you've just done. Now, many people are a little bit timid about that, talking about their child, talking about their upbringing, talking about their schooling, or talking about their athletics, like you just said. How do you get beyond that? Because obviously, as you've just illustrated, using those creates the memorability, creates the impact, creates relatability. How does an individual who's never been in that mode, never had to make those kind of presentations, and feels like maybe it's a little I don't know, not professional. Maybe it seems like it's, if I'm going to talk about my child, how does that relate to marketing? But it might well, as you've described it, your own athletics. How does someone who's never done that kind of break through a mold, and get into the mode of being able to make those kind of presentations?
Well, as you know, hammer throwing and pole vault are the two most technical events in track and field. And so the more technical the event, the more practice you need to do. And to become a good hammer thrower takes 10,000 hours of practice. And the same with public speaking. It's an extremely technical skill to have, and it takes 10,000 hours. So you really have to put the groundwork in, put the hours in, and really draw upon your inner stories. What were the most significant stories in your life that have impacted on your life? What were the most challenging or life-threatening or interesting stories in your life? And everyone's got their own stories. So you drill into your background and you find that story. And then that story needs to make a point. So what's the point of the story? Because if you tell a story and it doesn't have a point, it just wastes time and confuses the audience. Mm-hmm. So the story needs a point to make it. And I guess that's like a fable, and the moral of the fable or the moral of the story is this. So the point of the story needs to be articulated. And then it always comes back to the audience, because most people are motivated by rational self-interest. They're sitting there listening to a speaker saying, well, what's in this for me? The WIIFM, that's not a radio station in Wisconsin. That's agency theory at work. Most people looking at the world through their own prism saying, well, what's in this for me? So you need to frame it up as a benefit back to their audience. So the microstructure I teach is tell a story, a powerful personal story, and then say the point of this story is this, so it's really clearly articulated, and then say the benefit of sharing this story is this. So that's the power of personal storytelling. And if you tell a story about, protecting the family, we know from research that's the most universal value in the world, and that connects with all audiences, and advertising tells us that. So there's a lot of messaging in advertising around the theme of protecting the family. So if you can tell a story about how you protected your family and articulate the point that communicates to the audience, and then the benefit back to them, you're well on the way to making a really effective presentation. It does take courage, and often we find that if people are vulnerable when they're presenting, they're coming from a place of strength, not weakness, because that builds a bridge with the audience. Because when someone shares something vulnerable with another human in terms of the communication process, that builds rapport, which builds trust. Mm-hmm. Audiences don't like presenters who talk about themselves all the time. So when you're telling the story, you don't want your eyes to be too close together. And I was a manager in radio, and often with our presenters on radio, we'd say their eyes are too close together because they talk about themselves too much. You need to frame the story in the lens of the audience. So often you tell the story in the third party. So you say, imagine there's this young, fresh-faced hammer thrower who has a honours degree in biochemistry, and it's, he's down and dejected and not the best hammer thrower in Australia. So he spends 10,000 hours training to be the best. And so it's sort of framing the story up more as a narrative, more of like telling a story, telling a tale. And that's how you do it. You don't say, I did this and I did that, because people don't like that sort of big noting. So it's framing the story up through the lens of the audience. And in fact, all of your whole presentation really should be framed around meeting the needs of your audience. So that comes back to understanding your audience. And when you get booked to do a presentation or asked to do a presentation, the first thing you should do is start researching your audience, asking key questions about who is my audience, what age are they, what gender, what level of experience, what geographical location, what level of education, what is their kind of background. Will the presentation be sort of face-to-face or a hybrid model like this via a virtual environment? So the more you can research about your audience, the better, because audiences take in information in different ways. Some people are very visual. I'm a visual learner. Some people are very auditory. They just like to sit and listen. And some people are kinesthetic. They like to touch and do things. You need to have these anchor points in your presentation to appeal to all types of different audiences. Now, some will predominantly go to whatever sense they favour. So, for example, graphic designers will be visual. Lawyers tend to be auditory. Physiotherapists tend to be kinesthetic. So, if you research your audience, you can understand how they like to take in information, and then sort of customise your methodology of delivery around that.
And what you're saying also, I'm presuming or inferring that when you say, let's say you're making a presentation to your team or to your management or your boss, it's not just what rank they are, it's what message you want to convey to them and what their specific takeaways need to be, right? The intent you described and understanding
Absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're doing a presentation, ask the people that have given you the presentation, what outcomes do they want to achieve?
Yep.
What objectives do they want to achieve? And my favourite question is to ask the people that have asked me to speak to say, well, after the presentation, what would make you go, wow, that was just what we wanted?
Right.
Because often the answer to that question doesn't come from the head. It comes from the gut. And it's that visceral response that often is the most honest, direct response. Also, just to find out contextually what's happening to an organisation. I'll never forget an example. I was a big keynote speaker at a big conference in Singapore. And I tell you this story not to impress you, but to impress upon you the importance of doing research. And I've met this lady called Nance Chong Como. She'd come to Perth as the Entrepreneur of the Year from Singapore, and I heard her speak, and then I met her and did a podcast interview with her. And so I researched her, and then when I went back to Singapore, I was going to use her as a great example of this terrific Singaporean entrepreneur. Now, the night before my presentation, I was having dinner with a friend in Singapore, and he said, do you know what has happened to Nance? And I said, no. And they said, well, she's just gone into bankruptcy. And so, fortunately, I had that piece of information, and I didn't kind of step on the stage and make a, big mistake. Mm-hmm. I kind of understood that, and I flipped the story around, and I said, despite being the Entrepreneur of the Year and having X number of years in business, you can still, go into bankruptcy, and the importance of, having resilience is to overcome that setback and push through those barriers. So that is just a good example of something like that. And then, there are other examples that relate to the cultural sensitivities of the audience. Another case study that comes to mind was my experience for the first time speaking in Vietnam at a big business conference in Ho Chi Minh City. And it was a marketing conference with speakers from all around the world. And I was from Australia, and I was talking about sort of branding and marketing. And I was looking for the big case study about a big Vietnamese brand that was going to globally dominate the world. Was it Vietnam Milk or Vietnam Airlines? And I said, the people of the world think of Vietnam in terms of the powerful visual images as the helicopters taking off from the palace at the fall of Saigon, the end of the Vietnamese War. And that was my sort of big closing story. And then someone came up to me afterwards and said, Thomas, we loved your presentation and your energy, but for people in Vietnam, it's not the fall of Saigon, it's the liberation of Ho Chi Minh City. So I had the whole cultural context of my big story around completely the wrong way. And so when you're speaking internationally, the mistakes that you make around culture are amplified many, many, many times.
And in
so
this world,
that's why public speaking is one of the most challenging, complex, and technically kind of advanced skills you can do. But the benefit of mastering public speaking is the fact that you can influence so many people. It's what I call a one-to-many marketing activity. Instead of having to go and see people one-on-one as a sales opportunity, if you can speak in front of 500 people and get your message across through a presentation, that way it's such a powerful, efficient way of both marketing and really making a difference in the world.
I think that you've spoken very clearly about this, and it's fascinating now that we're all on a version of Zoom, Skype, meeting, WhatsApp, or whatever, Slack. Everyone has that power because you're often, where it used to might have been a one-on-one meeting with a colleague, now with 2 clicks you've got 2 colleagues plus yourself. Another click and you've got a few more. So before you know it, meetings, I don't know in the context of what you're doing now, how many of those on your team, but it's very quick that you can add many people to a discussion, which is what I do so many times a day now, and they're all visual. Actually, I think we've done interviews where someone comes into the interview and doesn't put their video on. Big mistake. People come into the meeting and they don't have a proper background. They have, I've had strangest interviews of all, for example, where some person looking for a job has their headphones on, standing in a train station, totally inaudible, people walking by them in the background, and it was almost as if I was zooming into a police scene, something that I shouldn't be seeing. So what about that? I mean, it sounds silly, but today we all sit in front of a camera of some sort, our phone, our computers. What do you do to just make some basic, simple, without buying a whole green screen setup, without buying high-end cameras? What do you do just to make a simple presentation to people you work with in terms of the scene setting?
This is the big trend that presentations now going virtual, the use of technology, the restrictions on travel. So pretty much part of your toolkit now is being an effective presenter, in front of a camera. So you need to treat your workspace as a home-based studio, not just a home-based office, but a home-based studio. So you've actually got to think of your workspace around that camera, as a studio. So I have a background in media and television. So what are the important elements of a studio? Well, number one, good sound quality, absolutely. If you've got lots of ambient noise, that's going to distract from your message. Secondly, good lighting. So people need to see your face, and in particular, see your eyes. And then thirdly, the level of the camera, needs to be at eye height. And then the other aspect is, what is the background? Obviously, you can have a virtual background, or you can have a real background. If you have a real background, just make sure what is in the background is congruent with your brand. Don't have anything that is not congruent with your brand, and perhaps make the background visually interesting. So I say to people, instead of just having a flat wall, try and have the corner of the room in the middle of the screen. That will just give the setup a little bit more depth rather than just being flat. So they're just some tips. I also believe if you're presenting virtually, always stand. To use the hammer throwing metaphor, it's very challenging to win the gold medal in the hammer throw from a chair in a seated position. You do it standing up. So if you want to have the most power, the best physiology, and your body to be ready to perform, because a presentation is a performance, both virtually and live from the stage, you need to be at your peak performance, and that is in a standing position rather than a seating position, which is often a position in rest.
Yeah, and it's very easy these days. Certainly, I'm sure in Australia, or certainly I know for myself, every major retailer that sells anything related to furniture has a virtual background they offer on their websites. So all you need to Google is a Teams background, Zoom background, Slack background, whatever, and you'll find one that'll fit you. You'll frame it properly. But I think that many people would not, if you're a technologist, if you're someone in project management, you wouldn't think, oh, why, how could that really matter much? But it does matter, right? Because people are watching you in your context. And as you said, your
Absolutely.
personal brand. You need to establish some message you're trying to communicate, correct?
That's right. And when we do media training, we teach people how to do sort of media interviews for television. We say if you can get your brand over your right or your left shoulder during that media interview, and if that's used in the TV news story, that can be between $50,000 and $100,000 worth of free branding for you. So you should treat the Zoom camera or the virtual camera as similar. You should have your branding prominent as well, if that works for you, if that's one of the objectives you want to achieve.
And when you say your branding, you mean your let's say you're a company and you have your logo, or do you mean the environment you set up?
Yeah, your logo. If that's important to you to have your logo, on screen, that's important. And you mentioned dress. Absolutely, I would say people will judge you on screen by what you wear. Obviously, they can't see the kind of the shoes and things like that, but you do want to dress up for the screen. And also, I think one of the important things is to kind of look good on camera and look at the camera and just prepare yourself to say, well, because of the visual nature of these virtual meetings, it's a more intimate, it's almost, it's like a close-up. It's not a long shot, it's a close-up of the head and shoulders. So, whatever people can see in the head and shoulders, that's important. So nothing that would distract them, so no hair that distracts with dangly earrings or things like that. And you want to look professional when you do that. And ambient noise. Well, you want a good microphone. No dogs barking or children barging in or trucks going by or things like that. Unless that ambient noise sort of adds to the drama and the theatre of getting your message across. But most people, if they're working from a home office, we want to, as I said, a home-based studio to make it as professional as possible. And it doesn't have to be expensive.
And you don't have to have been if you don't have to have been a professional with decades of experience like yourself to do this. You have to have probably watched some interesting news show or some interesting interview, and for dollars, not tens of dollars, or certainly not hundreds of dollars, buy the equipment that makes you sound best and ask people, how do you sound? Am I coming through clearly? Can you hear my voice? Is my image stable? And for again, few dollars or few rupees or whatever it is, you can upgrade to make an entirely different message. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's worth spending a good audio, good camera. Like a lot of people would use the camera in their laptop. That the quality of that camera is not as good. So if you can buy an external camera is good, and a high quality microphone. Audio is really important.
Well, Tom, once again, fantastic talking to you. Again, great insights, really clear, and I hope everyone enjoys this and that we do it again sometime in the near future. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Paul, for having me on Meet the Gurus.